Mike Bohn here in Anaheim with Jon Anik. UFC 298 weigh-ins just completed. And John, off the top, I guess we have to talk about Junior Tafa just came in on hours' notice to replace his brother, Justin Tafa, against Marcos Rogerio de Lima. Have you ever seen anything like this before? Is this like one of the shortest notice replacements we can think of who wasn't on the card originally?
Yeah, this is wild. My twin brother travels with me. He's ready to step up on the broadcast if need be as well. But all credit to Junior Tafa stepping up here to fight just a monster of a man in Marcos Rogerio de Lima. I feel bad for Justin Tafa. He injured his knee earlier in the week and tried to get right, and it looked like he was going to be able to compete, and then the knee locked up on him again. So really feel bad for Justin, but Junior's just a dog, man. I know it sounds trite, but he's an absolute warrior stepping in there, and good on pays out for accepting as well. So not down to 11 fights. We got a dozen here at 298.
Yeah, credit to him for stepping in. Credit to the UFC for making this happen. You don't see this in many other sports, so pretty remarkable. Other than that, biggest takeaway from the weigh-ins this morning? Anyone you thought looked maybe a little drained, fantastic? What do you think?
Well, Merab Dvalishvili in our fighter meeting seemed very exhausted, and I think he has a little bit of an old-school approach to cutting weight, kind of fasting for several days. So I was encouraged by Merab's energy at the press conference, just juxtaposed against what we saw in the fighter meeting, and then I thought he looked great on the scale here today. Cejudo looked great, but Ilia Topuria and Alexander Volkanovski just looked to be in fantastic shape. And, age is just a number, but whether Alexander Volkanovski, now taking part in his 30th pro MMA fight, is 35 or 29, I still feel like we're getting a prime Alexander Volkanovski. And if Topuria beats him, he's beaten the consensus greatest featherweight of all time.
We've had some massive fights in featherweight history. Obviously, doesn't need to be said the names that have been involved. You were in the middle of that press conference yesterday. Absolutely wild crowd, high energy. Your feeling going into this one, where does this rank? Does this feel like one of the bigger featherweight title fights we've had?
Yeah, it's as good as it gets, right? I mean, I think it sounds hyperbolic when I start to talk about these fights in these glowing terms, but I think Ilia Topuria did a great job of building and selling the fight. I don't know that he is expectant that he's really going to knock Alexander Volkanovski out in round one. I think there could be a little bit of feeling out process early, but there's a lot of mutual respect on both sides. I think Volk is grateful that he has an opponent here that is willing to talk and help him build the fight a little bit. But Topuria, just long on self-belief, long on skill, deserves to be here. And I've been saying all week, he's 27 years old. He is not yet at his fighting prime. If he doesn't beat Volkanovski this weekend, I do think we're still looking at a future UFC champion. So there's so much shine on Miami and UFC 300, and rightfully so, but I always want to direct the conversation back to 298. This pay-per-view main card is disgustingly good.
Yeah, it's great. And for Ilia, if he does pull this off, you're kind of on the inside. You hear things that maybe we don't. How big of a star is this guy, maybe in Spain and other places, and how big could he be if he goes out there and wins the way he says he's going to win?
Enormous. He's already got a massive following, and he's done things his way. Largely, these guys have been working in silence. When I sat down with him in December, I asked him about the unheralded nature of his coaches, and he said, once I become champion, everybody's going to get their shine. But I just like the manner in which he goes about his business, walks around like a gangster. He looks like James Bohn, and I'm excited to see what he can do with the showcase. I don't expect him to be nervous, and I don't really feel like he is truly in his head dismissive of the challenge in front of him. I think he's just trying to build the fight, but this would be singularly one of the biggest wins in featherweight history. What I'm curious about is whether or not Volkanovski, if he were to lose, would want to stick around for an immediate rematch, because it seems like his sights are set on big fights at 55, but Saturday night, I think those questions will give way to answers.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Do you think win or lose, this could be the last time we see Volk at 45?
I think so. I think if he loses to Ilia Topuria, there's a chance that he would try to right that wrong, so to speak, but there are just a lot of big fights for him at 55, and even though I can suggest to you that Alexander Volkanovski is still in his fighting prime at 35, he's not going to be one of these guys who fights until he's long in the tooth. I don't think he'll fight into his 40s, so I think he's looking at the next 2 to 3 years, trying to optimize things financially, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see him at UFC 300, depending on what happens here on Saturday night.
That'd be wild. No, you're short on time here, so just last thing, obviously stat card, what storyline outside of the main event are you focused on the most going into this fight card?
It's an embarrassment of riches. Very curious to see how Ian Machado Gary handles, without question, the toughest fighter he has faced in Jeff Neal, and also just curious to see how Merab Dvalishvili handles Henry Cejudo, because Merab is one of the most offensively inclined fighters on the roster, and even though he's not long on finishes, I feel like he is wildly entertaining to watch, both on Instagram, outside the octagon, and in the octagon. But can he get past what it looks to me like a very difficult stylistic challenge in Henry Cejudo? If he does, I hope he'll bide his time and wait for that championship opportunity, because you can argue after he beat Petr Yan, he was worthy of a title shot then, and it didn't come his way. So I'm curious to see what form Cejudo shows up in. Seems like he's at the height of motivation again, which I think is encouraging, but pay-per-view main card is absurd.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. You can hear Jon Anik on the call with Joe Rogan, Michael Bisping Saturday night. Follow your coverage on MMA Junkie. Looking forward to it, John.
Thank you, my man.